Hello there and welcome back. In this video, we're going to start applying what we've learned about defocus and lens effects and make our own custom defocus setup. So let's hop right in. So this is where we left off with our shot previously, and we have this default nuke defocus node. Let's go ahead and make something with a little more control. So we can just get rid of this, and the first thing we're going to do is make a node called convolve. Now what convolve will do is it will take an alpha channel and apply it to each pixel in your background. So let's take a quick example at what that would look like. We can just make a reformat really quick. We'll make this a square. We can do 512. And let's just draw a shape really quick. Maybe we can draw a heart like we saw in that video. This is going to be a jankily made heart, but it'll get the point across. Perfect. We'll pipe that into our filter and let's take a look. Maybe our heart's a little too big, so we can scale it down. And you can see that our bokeh is now heart-shaped. So you can use a convolve to get any sort of bokeh shape that you'd like in it. If heart-shaped bokeh is what we were going for, this would work great, but it is not because we want this to look as realistic as possible. So let's go ahead. We'll just go to Google really quick. And I know of a specific lens texture that I like, and it's onion ring bokeh. And if we go to the images tab here, we have a really nice texture right here that we'll be able to grab and use as our defocus. So let's go ahead and save this image into our elements folder. And we'll bring it in with a read node. And the first thing we want to do, this is in a nice square format that will work really nicely. We want to cut out our bokeh shape. So we can just grab an ellipse. We will click in the middle and start dragging, and then hit Control and Shift to uniformly drag out from the center. That's pretty close. I'll just Control A to select everything and get that a little more centered. And now we can pre-mult the RGBA. Cool, so we have a bokeh shape. Let's go ahead and just feather this out a touch. And now what we need to do is we need to center this in the square aspect ratio here. And so what we'll do is we'll make a transform node with T, and then we'll just control click and drag this anchor and move it to the dead center of our bokeh. And we can actually get this to move precisely into the middle. Let's do that. We'll just make another transform node. I'll hit shift and double click to open both transforms up. And what we can do, because we know to move this to the center, it's going to be the difference between these two values. So first we can just drag our center point into our translate here. And then we can do 256 minus this value, and Nuke will actually calculate it and give us the resulting number. And we'll do the same here. And that will just perfectly center this up for us. And now we can remove that. And now our bokeh shape, if we make a new transform, is perfectly centered. That's great, because how we're going to control the size of this bokeh in our footage is through scaling it. So we will call this align to center. And we'll name this transform defocus amount. Great. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and pipe this into our convolve and see what we have. All right, so that is very blurry. Let's look at this through our crop. Let's go ahead in our defocus amount and start bringing it down. Now this is looking a lot like our defocus node here. Let's go ahead and just, for a quick test, we will make a incredibly bright spot with our roto paint. We'll grab the paintbrush here, hold shift and drag to make it tiny. And in the color palette, I just control clicked there to open this window. Let's change it to be 500. crazy bright. So I'm just going to draw a dot there. When we look at our convolve, we can see our shape more clearly. Now, right now, this is not looking correct. This looks just like our defocus node did. So what we can do is instead maybe use the blue channel. The reason we see a change is because the filter channel is telling the convolve what channel to use as its texture. And our alpha was just a pure circle because that's what our roto shape was. And now we can see we have a nice defined texture in here. And we can actually make this more obvious in a couple different ways. We could contrast this shape up a little, bring it down, and you can start to see some of those details coming through, especially that outer ring. That's looking really nice. But if you notice, this has kind of a green halo around it, and that happens a lot in bokeh, and we want to make sure we're implementing that in our defocus here. And so what we can do is we can tell it to use the RGB of this image. So in order to do that, let's first just desaturate this because we don't want to change the color. And then let's add that little green highlight back in. And we can do that by using an FXT chromatic aberration. Let's actually use this after we've centered it. And what this will do is it will start to introduce some green in there. This node is my favorite chromatic aberration gizmo. It does a really nice job of allowing you to easily control the red, green, and blue scale on the left there, and it allows you to get a good looking chromatic aberration very quickly. We'll check off use center mask so it's affecting the whole thing. Maybe we'll just turn our color correct off for now, and let's try to get this to look like the original. That's not too bad. Let's see what it looks like in here. Now you'll notice we still don't have any color in here, and that's because we're looking at the blue channel as a black and white map for what this bokeh should look like. But if we check use input channels, suddenly we see that little green ring has popped out. Maybe we can take it a little further. Let's actually pop this again. We maybe went a little too far with that contrast. And it really depends what kind of bokeh effect you want to go for. We could really cheat this green out to feel it. You can see it in these fringes here, a little chromatic aberration because of this green edge that we're introducing. And it's a nice effect. It's very subtle, but it will definitely help in making this feel more realistic. Another thing we can do to really make the bokeh pop, because the full range of this image is not really being exposed because this is a very compressed video. These lights are certainly much brighter than everything else that's in the image, but it's not really coming across through our color. So what we can do is we can make a keyer. And let's go ahead and just select the brightest parts of our image. And we'll make sure we're not including the sky. We'll do a quick roto shape. We won't output an alpha, but we'll pre-multiply our alpha. We can see that balloon flaring up right there, and I think that's going to look really nice. So let's go ahead and make a color correct. Start brightening that up and see what it looks like. And now we're seeing those bokeh shapes pop very nicely. We might have gone a little too far. But this is starting to feel very organic. Especially around here, you can really feel the green fringing. If we turn this off, you'll notice it goes away entirely. And it's all about stacking these subtle effects on top of each other. So previously with the defocus, we were giving this an anamorphic bokeh look, and we can go ahead and replicate that again pretty easily. We'll add another transform, And we'll call this bokeh aspect ratio. And we know this is centered. Let's look at this really quick, and we can just squeeze this in. And now we have our anamorphic bokeh look going again, and it looks very nice. Let's re-add a defocus just so we can compare what we've done here. Change the aspect ratio to 0.5. We'll start blurring this out again. And you'll see the difference is subtle, but I think it certainly helps. And I'm wondering if potentially feathering out this edge is hurting us more than it's helping. Let's turn that off. Not too big of a difference. I'll just leave it off. But now with this setup, we can find any bokeh shape that we would like and just pipe it in, and it will feel much more organic, especially in these bright areas. The next thing I would like to do is introduce a little bit of a cat's eye effect where the inside is bowing in a little and not quite as defocused. That's something that's very common with anamorphic lenses, and it would be a great thing to recreate. And so we can do that by using the lens distortion node. Typically, you use the lens distortion node to, as it sounds, undistort your lens, and that will make your image flat. There won't be any weird spherical distortion making things move strangely. But that's not how we're going to use it right now. We're going to use it to cheat our bokeh to get that cat's eye effect. So let's just look at this really quick. And we can grab this denominator S, and you can see we're stretching the outside of this image. So let's just go ahead and leave that here. We can copy and paste this. These settings are never really set by hand. They're typically automatically analyzed, but we're hacking this in this case. And now what we can do is change this to redistort. And if we turn these off, you'll notice they're perfect opposites of each other. So what that means is that if we put our convolve in between these two, we start to get a little bit of a cat's eye because it's applying it on stretched out footage and then being moved back into place. And that's starting to feel very natural and organic, and it's exactly how I would expect an anamorphic lens to behave. Now what we can do is we can copy the links and paste the absolute link in here. So now if I change my lens distortion 1, you'll see that lens distortion 2 will auto update because these are now expression linked together. So now we can use this knob to control how intense our cat eye effect is. Now let's compare what we've made compared to where we were. Look at this crop. And this feels much more natural and organic to me. So now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and set up a custom gizmo in our next video so we can use this setup over and over instead of having to recreate it every time. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.